Hello everyone and welcome to what is episode 7 of CMB podcast with me, Carl Magnus Bodén. This is a special edition in the sense that we do this in English. Normally this is a Swedish podcast, but this is a special for English viewers and listeners. And with me as always I have my friend, co-host and producer Michel Cavalli. Welcome, Michel.
Thank you. Hello.
So the aim of today's episode is to do sort of a crash course on obesity. So we will try to walk you through how obesity works, who gains weight and why, who is to blame for this, and then move on to how you can treat this condition. So that's roughly what we're going to speak about today. So my background is that I'm a physician. I'm a medical gastroenterologist, and I work at GB Obesitas, which is the biggest bariatric surgery clinic in Sweden and actually in all of Scandinavia. But we also treat patients with obesity medicine, so it's not only bariatric surgery. And you are here, Michel, to sort of sidekick me and make this a bit more of an interactive discussion. So are you ready?
I will try. Yeah, I'm ready. Yeah.
So where should we start?
We should start with who gains weight and why.
Yeah, so that's a good way to start. So the first thing that comes into play when it comes to understanding who gains weight, it is what genes we have. And we are born with our genes, so we can't do anything about it. We get our genes from our mother and father. So the most common variation of genes when it comes to weight is so-called obesity-sensitive genes or obesogenic genes. That doesn't mean that you have to gain weight, but it means that you can gain weight. You're sensitive to weight gain. And this has been a good thing to have genes like this for many thousands of years, because if there has ever been any problem with nutrition in society, it's always been lack of food, like poverty, starvation, wars, famine. So if there's ever been a problem with access to food, it's always been the lack of food. It's always been starvation. So having genes that allow you to put on weight whenever there is food available has always been a good thing, because who knows when we're going to run out of food again. So most of us have obesogenic genes or obesity-sensitive genes. So that means you can gain weight, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you will, but you can. So that's like number one. And then number two, the factor that decides how many of us with this type of gene setup will actually gain weight over life, that then depends on what environment, what society you put these genes into. So we're sitting in Sweden now, so if you're a Swedish person, you will be living in a Swedish modern society. And for those of you watching or listening that live in the UK, for instance, you will be living in that society. But Sweden and the UK have a lot in common nowadays. It's a society that's completely different from a weight perspective than just 40 or 50 years ago. We eat different, we work different, we move less, we stress more, etc., etc. So there's not a one factor that has changed over time. It's many factors together, like a perfect storm, that all of a sudden makes this a problem. So like in the 1970s, even though our population gene pool was more or less the same, meaning there were as many people with obesity-sensitive genes in the 1970s as there is today, overweight or obesity was not a problem. Not because of the genes, because they were the same, but because the society was different. And nowadays, all of a sudden, it's a problem, and the things that have changed are factors in society and not the genes. So the society in the last 2 generations or so has moved from the more classic, like homemade food made from scratch, more everyday exercise, going to and from school, at school, going to and from work, maybe more physical labor at work, different stress levels, no internet,
No video games.
no video games,
Smartphones.
maybe different attitudes towards alcohol and whatnot, as compared to today. So the big difference when it comes to our environment is like the total. It's like it's not one factor; it's all these factors together. So number one, obesity-sensitive genes. Most of us have that. Number two, a society that's become more and more toxic, if you so will, when it comes to living in this society without gaining weight. It's getting increasingly hard to not gain weight. And then the third factor that most people, if you talk to a patient with obesity, will tell you is that there's usually a trigger factor too, like you quit smoking, you gain weight, you get an exercise, you hurt yourself by exercising, so you can't train anymore, you gain weight, you become sick, or you get a medication because you're sick, but the medication increases your appetite, you gain weight. If you're a woman, you become pregnant, you gain a lot of weight while you're pregnant, you have the child, but a lot of the kilos are still there. So there will often be a trigger like factor 3. So genes, environment, and maybe a trigger. So that is why people gain weight. And all of this has basically happened the last 40 to 50 years. So now in Sweden, we have 52% of Swedish adults are overweight. And by that, you mean a body mass index above 25. And 16% of Swedes have obesity, and that means a body mass index above 30. If you take the United Kingdom as a comparison, they have a bigger problem with this. So overweight is about 2/3 of British adults, so 67%. And obesity is 25% compared to Sweden's 15-16. The curves are moving up in both countries. So in both countries, it's gradually getting worse. But that's the numbers right now.
And Sweden and Great Britain are the worst in Europe, or the same as...
Britain currently is the worst in Europe.
Okay.
So far, and not the worst in the world. They have bigger problems in Latin America, North America, parts of the Middle East. But unfortunately, all the trend curves are going in the wrong direction. So for every year that passes by, these problems get slightly worse and worse and worse, unfortunately.
And why Great Britain and Sweden? Why are we worse off than other European countries?
We consume more so-called ultra-processed foods than people in the Mediterranean countries do, for instance. So, meaning we eat less and less home-cooked food from scratch, and we eat more and more and consume more and more ultra-processed, like it could be anything from fast food meals to the microwave meals to, sweets, candy, energy drinks, whatever. All this combined, this is all ultra-processed foods, and they're more calorie dense, and they are not addictive, but they give you cravings for more much easier than food cooked from scratch does, which is more common in the area, in the countries around the Mediterranean, for instance. So that's like a big difference. Okay. But again, there are many factors that come together to make us end up where we are. But of course, food is a really big factor. And at least, I don't know exactly how this has been in the UK, but in Sweden, one big factor, if you compare the 1980s with today, is of course that we've moved from maybe quite often one parent working full-time and maybe often the wife not working full-time and therefore taking more care of things at home, including cooking, to both parents working full-time, which of course is fine, but when women in Sweden went into the workforce and started working full-time, we men didn't back home, did we? We kept on working full-time. Yeah. So you go from one of the adults back home sort of as a part of their daily duties is to take care of cooking, for instance. No one's like in charge of that because both are working full time, and then you have to try and find the time to do this anyways. And of course, then it can be sometimes maybe a necessary solution to end up with nobody's cooking a couple of days a week. Instead, you buy takeaway. You go out to a restaurant or however you solve it. But as soon as you do that, the risk of the food being more or less high processed and thereby triggering weight gain is much higher. And so that's probably one of the causes. Yeah.
And all the easy to make food are not always, but it tends to be the crappy food.
Yeah, exactly. So, and there's even research on this. So if you have these so-called ultra-processed foods, there is research from North America where they have put test people to live in a controlled environment, and they let this group of people they divided them into two halves, and one half was free to eat as much or as little of home cooked non-processed food as they wanted, and the other half were put to eat ultra-processed food as much or as little as they wanted instead. And they kept these two groups in this environment for 2 weeks, and then they monitored what happened. And the group that was eating home-cooked food, on average, would eat 500 kilocalories less of food per day compared to the group with ultra-processed food. And it was also shown that the group eating the ultra-processed food, not only did they eat more every day, they also ate the food faster. And then they kept control of everything else, so they knew that both groups, they were as physically active and so on, so there was nothing confounding the picture. So what you showed was that if you eat ultra-processed foods, you would tend to eat the food faster, and you would tend to spontaneously eat more calories per day, even though you don't physiologically need it. So, and this goes to show that ultra-processed food not only makes you full, but it also increases your risks of having cravings for more of the same type of food. Okay. Which is, of course, a big reason that ultra-processed foods are so popular in society, because not only do you find them pleasant to eat, they will also induce you into having more cravings for the same type of food again. So,
and also, at least in Sweden, if you go to a grocery store, at least or almost half of the store is made up of sweets and candy.
Yeah. Of
Whereas
course.
if you go to Italy, I think maybe 5 or 10% of the store is sweets and candy.
Yeah.
So it's easier in Sweden to
exactly. Well,
you
have Italian heritage, so you know what you're talking about, I guess. Yeah. So, and of course, there's nothing wrong with having sweets once in a while, but it's all a matter of what does it add up to, like at the bottom line? What is the total picture? And I can just remember from growing up in Sweden that, of course, we had sweets like on Saturdays when I grew up, but it was a pretty small paper bag, and it was like a pretty small soda to go with it. And now, 40 years later, it's for most kids, I would guess, it's a pretty big bag of candy, and it's a way bigger soda, and that slowly seems to become worse and worse and worse every year that goes by. So it seems like the more money we get, the more time we get to spend away from work, the more sweets, sodas, and other stuff we consume somehow. So that's the background. And then, of course, what's the problem? Well, the problem if you gain weight is, of course, that if you end up living in a too big a body, it will be uncomfortable for you. It will be a body that the clothes don't fit well anymore. activities of everyday life become harder. You get pain in your knees. You get shortness of breath when you're walking up the stairs, stuff like that, which is of course important. But from a medical perspective, it's also important to know that a high BMI, a high body mass index, long term is actually dangerous too, from a health perspective. So if you look at studies, and there's a big pooled study in the paper, the Lancet, that came around like 2016. And if you compare a person with a normal body mass index, and that's a BMI of 20 to 25, if you compare that person to someone who has a BMI of 40 instead, where the threshold for obesity is 30. So if you have a BMI of 40, you compare people with a BMI of 40 with people with a normal BMI, the people with a BMI of 40, the women will have increased their risk of death by a disease by more than 200%. And men have increased their risk by about 350%.
So women are better off.
Women are better off, true. It's more dangerous to live with a high BMI if you're a man than if you're a woman at the same BMI level.
Why is that?
Probably because we men get more adipose tissue on our abdomen, which is more dangerous and more connected to other diseases than women do. So there are two things to learn from that study. One, a high BMI in itself long term is actually dangerous. Like women have an increased risk of death by disease by 200%, men by 350% at the BMI 40. And the other factor is what you just said. It's actually more dangerous to be a man with a high BMI than a woman. So it's not only that living in a big body is uncomfortable for you as a person, long term it will also become dangerous. Meaning it's probably a very good thing to try and treat this, to reduce your weight and come back to a more healthy weight again. Which of course brings us to what is the most common method to try and lose weight, you think? What is the most common thing that people try if they have too big a body and want to lose weight? What do people do?
I don't know. Is it diet or eat less, move more? Or?
Exactly, right? Eat less, move more. So those of you are watching or listening and you live with obesity, you've most likely tried this, all of you, right? You've tried to eat less on purpose, move more on purpose, and then try to have as good structure and discipline as possible in doing this. This is like the basic equation for any type of diet. Doesn't matter if it's a diet recommended to you by your general practitioner or a dietitian, or if it's a diet coming from a commercial weight loss company, or if it's just advice you get from friends or relatives or social media or a tabloid newspaper. Doesn't really matter because it all boils down to this. You should eat less, move more. And of course, the idea behind this is, of course, the energy equation, that if you input less energy, you burn more energy. Of course, you get an energy deficit every day. So you burn more calories than you put in. And then you force the body to replace these calories from somewhere else. And then, of course, you have the adipose tissue in your body, and the body will burn fat to replace those calories so you can keep on going. And for every single day you do that, you lose more and more and more weight. And then the idea behind eat less, move more is, of course, that you keep this up until your body has become smaller and smaller and smaller. And finally, you will have a body the size that you want. And from then on, you can just move on to trying to keep balance instead in calories in and calories out. And then the problem is solved. That's like the idea of dieting, right? So
sounds easy.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it almost never ever works long term, which I know a lot of you watching or listening will recognize that's why it's called a yo-yo diet, right? So
why doesn't it work?
Exactly. So
Because for me, it's in a way, I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm a person who would, I'm one of those who would say just do it, just make up your mind.
Yeah.
Stop eating whatever it is. Start training.
Yeah.
Get a grip or control of your life and stick to it.
Exactly.
And why doesn't it work?
Yeah. And it's good that you say that, because the underlying messaging in eat less, move more is usually this type of, it's like a test of character. It's a test of discipline, right? I mean, you should be able to do this if you just have enough stamina to keep it up, right? So the personal stakes under the surface when you try to do a diet like this are usually pretty high, because under the surface, this is actually a test of character, right? Which makes the feeling of failure way higher if you do not succeed, right? Because it wasn't just your body weight you were treating, you were also testing your own character. So if the diet fails, well, then probably you will feel like your character failed too, right? Because it becomes a failure. So I think everyone agrees as to why you lose weight at the beginning of a yo-yo diet. So the first part, when you start losing weight all the way down to the bottom before the yo-yo turns back up, so far I think everyone agrees, because you are moving more, eating less, you have an energy deficit every single day, and because of that you lose weight. So far so good, and I think everyone is in agreement, so to speak. So the important thing to understand is what happens once the yo-yo goes back up again, because that's usually where the misunderstanding starts. So when the yo-yo starts going back up again, even though you as a patient will be feeling that, well, hey, I'm doing the same routine I was doing all along. I'm trying to eat the same. I'm trying to exercise the same. But why am I no longer losing weight? Why is weight going back up again? Well, if it was just a test of character, meaning, like you said before, then the only possible explanation, of course, is that you've run out of character. You can't take this anymore, so you go back to eating, and that's it. So it's your character flaw that makes you go.
You've lost
back
against yourself.
Exactly. But the real reason is that once you've lost enough weight and get to the bottom of the yo-yo, what's actually happened is that the body biologically has realized that it's been in starvation mode for a while. It's lost a bunch of kilos or pounds. And once you lose enough kilos or pounds, your body will start to biologically defend itself against the starvation. And here we can go back to the genes we talked about in the beginning of the program, that for thousands of years, it's been good to have genes that are resisting starvation, because the problem over thousands of years have always been that if there is something about nutrition that's off, it's always starvation, it's always lack of food. So the body has very strong defense mechanisms against weight loss. And what happens at the bottom of the yo-yo is that these biological defenses have kicked in. So at the bottom of the yo-yo, you are more hungry than normal. You probably feel hungry more or less all the time. And that's because your starvation hormones, including like ghrelin, have gone up to a high level in your blood, and it will be circulating in your body up to your brain, signaling hunger to your brainstem, to your hypothalamus. And so you're hungry all the time, and even if and when you eat, normally you feel full, you get satiety, but you don't get satiety in a normal way in this situation either, because at the same time as the body has turned the starvation hormones up, such as ghrelin, it has turned the satiety hormones, such as leptin, down. So more hungry than normal, way less full than normal, even if you eat. So you eat your meal, you feel full for a short while, then you immediately start to feel hungry again, because your leptin levels are low and your normal satiety signals are not there. So within like half an hour of eating a meal, you will go back to feeling hungry again. And then you're hungry again for a long time. Finally, you have to eat. You eat, you feel full for a short while, and then you go back to feeling hungry. And this will like go on and on and on until your body and your brain realizes that you have put all the kilos or pounds back on again. So when a yo-yo diet is finished, the body feels that, well, hey, now I have regained all the kilos I lost. I've regained all the kilos or pounds that I starved away. And then the ghrelin, the hunger, and the satiety, the leptin, then they level out again and become a bit more normal. But then you have put all your weight back on again. So the reason diets fail is not that the willpower or the character of the person fails. It is that these very, very potent, very, very old starvation defenses kick in. And long term, these defenses will more or less always win. It's just a matter of time. And then as to the move more part, because it was eat less, move more, right? It was two things. So the move more is, of course, the idea is to exercise more and thereby burn more. But the body can defend itself against that as well. So if you burn more and thereby lose weight, your body will just react by becoming more energy efficient in your muscles, meaning your metabolism in your muscles, both when resting and when exercising, will go down. So you become more and more energy efficient. And of course, if you become more energy efficient, you get less and less weight effect from training because you burn less and less and less when you exercise. So to keep that part of it up, you will have to exercise more and more and more and more to keep the burn effect up, to keep that effect on the weight up. And sooner or later, you will sort of run out of time and energy to keep on doing that. And the body can defend itself against that as well. With this said, of course, training and exercise is always good.
Yeah.
So that's not what we're saying. Training and exercise is really, really good for you. It has many, many good health effects. It's the more you train, the better. But it's
which
not,
is important. Don't stop exercising or training. You know?
But it's not like the golden key to solving this either, because the body has a weight defense against exercise as well. So the real reason diets fail is not that your willpower is failing or your character failed, which I think and suspect many of you have been thinking up until now. It's actually very potent biological defense mechanisms that kick in. So the good thing about what I just said is that it doesn't only explain why diets fail, it also actually explains why this is not your fault, which will be something we talk more about at the end here, but it's very important to understand. So that's diets.
So that was my question. Who is to blame? No one. It's not hard.
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
It's a very triggering question usually.
Yeah, it is. Especially for me coming from, I don't know what. I'm quite thin or I've never been obese or overweight or anything. And when I think about it, it's easy for me to think that just go out there, do your thing, exercise every day, try to eat healthy, take in less, put out more.
Yeah.
If you burn more calories than you take in, sooner or later you will go down, and it's just up to you to keep it up. Yeah. But I'm wrong.
Well, it's let's put it like this.
Or I'm right, but it's not that easy.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like we said, it's not like you get no effect from a diet, right? It is a yo-yo, meaning the body will allow the yo-yo to reach the bottom level before it turns back up again. So up to a certain point, the body will actually, you can short-term affect your body weight, right? You can lose all these kilos and pounds, but sooner or later, when you've lost enough kilos and pounds, these starvation defenses kick in, and then you will put the kilos back on, and it's biology, it's not character. So
you're in weight conflict with your brain, and there's no way to win.
And the brain always wins.
The brain always wins. Okay.
So to put it this way, so what is the best way to not have obesity? Well, the best way to not have obesity is to never ever develop weight gain into obesity in the first place.
Okay.
So there's unfortunately, when it comes to weight biology, you don't really get a second chance. So the best way of not being overweight or the best way of not having obesity is never ever getting it. Because once you've reached that level where you have it, most likely your body will start defending itself from that level, even though that level is too high. I mean, if you have a BMI of 40 and you go on a diet, you eat less, move more, of course, the body should welcome that because you had a BMI of 40. And as we mentioned before, that's long-term dangerous for your body. So the body should be welcoming that diet to get you from this elevated risk of dying from a disease into a more normal, healthy weight. But here is the problem that from history, the body has never, ever had to deal with the problem of overweight. It's always dealt with the problem of lack of food, starvation. So we have this really, really strong defense system against starvation, and we have no defense at all against overweight, excess weight, obesity. So even though you might start from a very high BMI and do your diet, the body will still defend itself. Even though the start weight is way too high, the body will still defend itself. So it will defend itself even though the weight you start with is unhealthy for you, which is, of course, like a big gap in the armor because this is not good for the body long term. But again, we have a very effective starvation defense and we have no overweight obesity defense. Okay. So once we put the weight on, the body will try to keep that weight, even if it's too much. So this is really hard.
But does it ever stop? I mean, if you gain weight, will your brain ever tell your body that this is enough? Enough is enough.
Not really, no.
Okay.
So then,
you're
of course,
at 180 kilos now. It's enough.
Yeah, well, that would have been good if the body had like a top threshold like that, saying, well, up to this, but no more. But that doesn't seem to be the way the body works, unfortunately. So there's a name for all of this. So what we can learn from all the yo-yo diets and what we just talked about is that you can temporarily alter your body weight, for instance, with a yo-yo diet, meaning you can lose weight for a short period of time. And most of our patients have pretty impressive personal bests when it comes to weight loss, meaning a lot of our patients will have lost many, many, many kilos and pounds for a while. But then long term, what always happens is that the starvation defenses kick in, ghrelins go up, you become more hungry, leptin goes down, you become less full, your metabolism goes down, and your weight comes back up. So the sum of these all of these mechanisms, the sum of all the signaling from the body to the brain, and the way the brain processes this in the hypothalamus is what is usually called the set point for body weight, or the weight thermostat, if you so will. So what long term decides our body weight is the set point for body weight in the brain. And the problem with the set point for body weight in the brain is that it's in the brain stem, it's in the hypothalamus, and we cannot reach the hypothalamus with our mind. So our consciousness, which is on the surface of the brain, cannot control the brain stem. So that way it doesn't matter how motivated we are or how disciplined we are or how much willpower we have, we still can't get to the brain stem. So long term, these mechanisms will always tend to win. And meaning if you go on a diet, you lose weight, well, sooner or later your weight will come back up. And this is called the set point for body weight. So that is why your diets fail. And that is also why it's not your fault when it fails.
Okay. So the set point proves my theory wrong.
Yes, okay. It does.
Yep.
And that also results in, if we want to treat obesity, that means if we are to treat obesity successfully, we have to try and treat the set point for body weight, the weight thermostat setting. And that's what all the modern treatments do. And that is the problem with a normal diet. So eat less, move more. It will starve your body, because it will. You will lose kilos in the beginning. But since it doesn't change the set point for body weight, since it doesn't change what the brain wants you to weigh, it doesn't work.
Okay. But how do I know what my set point is? Or what determines my set point? Or does it change? Can the set point change over time? Can I have one set point now and in a near future or long time?
Yes, you can. That is... Like your set point right now, I think you have been on more or less the weight you have now for quite a long time, right?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah, and that is your current set point for body weight. That's like where it is.
And
it's easier to check what the actual set point is for a person with obesity, because they've probably been on a diet. So what you're actually doing when you yo-yo diet is you actually test your weight biology by provoking it, by starving and losing weight. You're actually triggering the set point for body weight defense systems. So if you've been on a yo-yo diet, the weight you go back to after the yo-yo is done, after the diet has failed, that weight is the set point for body weight level that the body wanted to defend. So it's easier for a person with obesity who has done repeated diets to know more or less exactly what their set point for body weight is, because that's what you rebound to every single time you're on a diet.
So you rebound to your set point.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have not had that problem, so I don't think you have been on too many diets in your life. So in your case, it's most likely the average weight that you've had maybe the last 3 years. Okay. That's around where your set point is.
Okay.
So far, so good. So if we move on to treatment, and as I mentioned before, if we want to treat this, and we should, because long-term having a high BMI is not good for us. We mentioned the examples before. If you have a BMI of 40 and you're a woman, you have doubled your risk of dying of a disease. And if you're a man, you have almost quadrupled your risk. So it would be a good thing for us to treat our obesity, not only from a personal point of view when it comes to how you feel in your body and if you're comfortable with how you look and how you feel, but it's also important from a medical perspective. But then treating obesity effectively then becomes the same as lowering the set point for body weight. If you don't lower the set point for body weight, it will not work. And nowadays there are two different ways of treating set point for body weight. And we take the first one, that is the modern obesity medications. Okay. And they have, this has become a more dynamic field the last 5 years. They have new drugs have arrived, and the invention of the GLP-1 medications, the Ozempic was the first one to become widely known, at least. Originally type 2 diabetes medication, but it also turned out that patients on this medication, if they went to a slightly higher dosage, they would also lose weight. So, and Ozempic is a GLP-1 medication. And out of that, that drug company, Novo Nordisk, developed the drug Wegovy, which is their obesity drug currently. And then their competitor, the American company Eli Lilly, developed tirzepatide, which is Mounjaro, which is also a GLP-1 drug, but it also goes on another receptor called GIP or GIP. So we have two drugs now that are the most common ones: Wegovy, semaglutide, which is on GLP-1, Mounjaro, tirzepatide, which is on GLP-1 and GIP. Both of them are injections you take once per week under the skin. And both GLP-1 and GIP are originally hormones that the body produces naturally. Here you add extra effect of that hormone, and you add extra effect that lasts throughout the whole week, and then you take another injection and you repeat the dose. And what these molecules do is that they have receptors throughout the body. So they have receptors in the liver and the pancreas and so on, which is why Ozempic originally was a type 2 diabetes drug, because it's good for your blood glucose levels. But what research shows is that these, both GLP-1 and GIP hormones, also have receptors in the brain. And if you stimulate these receptors, you actually lower the set point for body weight. So what these drugs do when it comes to body weight is that they actually reduce your appetite. So as long as you take these drugs, you will have a lowered appetite, and actually then also a lowered set point for body weight. So if you match these drugs with a healthy diet, healthy lifestyle, you still have to keep track of all the other stuff. It's not a magic injection that you automatically lose weight from. So you still have to have a healthy lifestyle, keep track of what you're eating, keep exercising, sleep well at night, be careful with alcohol, be careful with internet screen time and so on. But if you do all of that and take these drugs, you will have a way better chance of succeeding in your weight loss than you would if you did not take the meds. So what these meds do is that they neutralize the normal starvation defense that would kick in if it was just a eat less, move more diet. So you avoid getting the yo-yo effect because you lower the set point for body weight in the brain with these meds.
And do they all do the same, these medications?
More or less, it's the same principle. The Mounjaro drug is slightly more effective than the Wegovy drug because it goes on two different receptors, so GLP-1 and GIP instead of just GLP-1. But the principle is the same, and what you want from the effect is the effect on the brain. The effect on the brain, lowering of set point for body weight, you are less hungry all the time.
But sorry, one question. You said as long as, meaning what? As long as?
Meaning you will have this effect as long as you take the drug every week.
And when you stop taking it?
Yeah, then you will unfortunately no longer have any effect on your brain. And then your set point for body weight in the brain will rebound up to the level you had before, and you will most likely start regaining the weight again. So it's
is it just like a medical diet, or?
You could say that. Well, it's like any other chronic disease that you can keep in check with a medication. You will have to take the medication regularly to keep the condition in check. It's a bit like high blood pressure, for instance. If you have hypertension, high blood pressure, you're put on a drug like tablets usually, and you take one tablet a day, and these tablets will reduce your blood pressure. You go to checkups with your doctor and you have a normal blood pressure. But if you go to a checkup with your doctor and your blood pressure is normal, your doctor will just prescribe the same medication for another year. And why? Because we know that we'll have to keep treating the blood pressure to keep the pressure low. If the doctor were to stop the medication there on your behalf, your blood pressure would just go back up. And we all know this is how high blood pressure works. So this is now no surprise. Both the doctor and the patient are usually fully aware that if I'm on these tablets, it will be for life. Well, treating obesity with medications will be the same. It's just that we're not used to this type of treatment so well yet because the medications haven't been around for so long. And there are a lot of opinions and attitudes regarding both obesity and weight loss. But with all the research we have now, there's nothing indicating that you can sort of stop taking these meds after a while and then keep your weight off, because that's not how the body works. So the medications are good, they're quite effective, but they will only last for as long as you take the drug. Meaning, if you start on a anti-obesity medication, such as Wegovy or Mounjaro, you must be aware that you will most likely have to take these medications for the rest of your life to keep the weight off. So not only take the drug while you're losing weight, but also keep taking the drug even after you've plateaued on your new lower body weight, just to keep the weight off.
Okay. But I mean, obviously I'm not a doctor, but so these medications, you pay for the medication, and then you have to make adjustments to your lifestyle.
Yeah.
Does everyone know this? Because I'm pretty sure. I'm not an expert, but from what I see in social media, it's you take an injection and you lose weight.
Yeah.
I think most people view it that way. They don't see the whole package, the whole thing, that you pay for this medication, you do it every week, and you have to do some lifestyle adjustments. And as soon as you stop doing that, you regain your weight or, okay.
Well, I think it's a good point, because I think it's very tempting now that when these drugs come, that you feel that, well, I just take these injections and then it's fine. The drug will do the work for me, and it will not. It will only make the work easier for you, because you have a decreased appetite. You will have a body that no longer works against you when you have your diet, and of course your diet will of course be some type of healthy version of eat less, move more, which is of course a bit ironic, right? Because that's what normal dieting is about, and we just told you guys that it doesn't work. So you will be trying to eat maybe like 500 kilocalories less per day than you normally would compared to your current body size. And you will be exercising, and you will be keeping track of your as healthy habits as possible. And if you do that and only do that, then you will end up with a yo-yo diet, just like we said before. But here, since you add the injection once per week, and then you lower the set point for body weight in the brain, and then you neutralize the body defense mechanisms.
Temporarily.
Temporarily. So the body stops defending itself against this weight loss. So that's how it works. So, but it's a good point, because I think it's easy now when these drugs are new. It's a new field. There's sort of a honeymoon effect going on now in society, where a lot of people are feeling that, well, hey, I'll just take these injections and the problem is solved. And it's not that easy, of course.
And I can imagine this is not for everyone, because there's a cost. Yeah. These drugs or medications are not free.
No. So there's a cost. And
so it's not for everyone.
No, automatically not. And of course, if you then weigh in the fact that all research speaks in the way of this being a continuous, probably lifelong treatment, then the cost will also add up over time. So taking a drug like this for like 6, 12, or 18 months would have been one thing, even though there would be a cost. But then if you could sort of think that, well, after that I can stop taking the drug and it will be fine. There's no research supporting that will work. All the research that is around speaks in the way of, well, you take these drugs to do your weight loss, but then as soon as you reach your new plateau, your new lower body weight, you will still have to keep taking the drug to keep the weight off. Just like the high blood pressure example we had before. And of course, if you weigh that in, then of course the cost will accumulate too.
So what are the pros and cons with these medications?
Yeah, okay. So the pros with the medications is, one, of course, it's not surgery. So it's easier to try and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, it's easy to just back out of it, because you just stop taking the meds, and then the effect will wane off and you're back to square one. So this is, of course, good. It lowers the threshold for getting into active treatment. That's good. Of course, this will make obesity medicine and obesity treatment easier to access, because a lot of primary care centers can write these prescriptions, so you don't have to end up in a specialty medicine setting like us with surgery to get the treatment. So it will be close. The treatment will become closer to the patient, you could say. That's good. They're at least moderately effective. So if you look at the studies, you will lose currently between 16 and 23% of your body weight if you're on these drugs. And what does that mean? Well, that means if you lose 16% of your body weight, that means if you started out at 100 kilos, you will go down to 84 kilos. If you in the 23% effect, then you will start at 100 kilos, you will go down to 77 kilos. So, which is quite good. You compare this to the surgeries that we will talk about shortly, and a sleeve gastrectomy as an effect of 26-27%, a gastric bypass around 33%. So not as effective as the operations, but, pretty good.
But these numbers are also if you do all the steps or things that the doctor will instruct you to do.
It's
the lifestyle change.
Yeah,
and, okay.
Yeah. So it's and that's the con in a way, because as we sort of mentioned before, it's easy to be fooled now into feeling that, well, I just have to take these injections and then I will have automatic weight loss. You won't. You will have a decreased appetite, and it will be much easier to have a lasting effect of your lifestyle change. But you have to do the lifestyle change also, especially if you want to get close to these 16 or 22% weight loss numbers I just mentioned, because they're taken from the controlled studies made by the pharmaceutical companies to show how effective these drugs are. And of course, if you're a pharmaceutical company doing studies on a new weight loss drug, of course, the lifestyle part of the treatment is very structured, very professional, very ambitious, and not always very easy to mimic in your normal everyday life as a normal person. So most people will not maybe lose as much weight as in the studies, but if you have a good healthy lifestyle and you do your best, you probably have a good shot at least coming as close to those numbers as possible. But you're right, it's important to understand that the 16% weight loss for Wegovy and the 22-23% weight loss for Mounjaro are in studies. They're not reports from studies of in real life setting patients. They're reports from controlled studies, which is of course slightly different. The number for surgery I mentioned before, the 26-27% weight loss for a sleeve gastrectomy and the 33% for a gastric bypass, they are, on the other hand, in real life data, because they are from registries post-surgery. So those numbers in that sense are stronger in a way, because they're not in a controlled study setting. It's more measuring how effective things are in real life. So the cons with the meds, well, one of the cons, depending on how you look at it, is of course what we just said. You still have to have a structured, healthy lifestyle. Taking the medication doesn't give you an automatic weight loss. So that's a con, if you didn't understand that before at least.
And you have to do it for the rest of your life.
That's the other con. It's a lifelong treatment. So for the absolute majority of people, if you want to keep the weight off, you will have to keep taking the medication. And then the third, of course, is that there are some side effects, especially in the beginning. So when you start taking the drug, you will feel a certain amount of nausea. You can have diarrhea. You can have vomiting. It's usually gastrointestinal problems. Usually wane off pretty quickly. So for most people, it will not be something that will stop you from taking the drug. But for some people, it will. So and then of course the last con, depending on the setting you're in, will be the cost. So like in Sweden currently, it's you as a private person, you pay the full cost of the meds, and of course if you consider that and the fact that it's a lifelong treatment, of course it will accumulate into becoming quite a lot of money long term. So you will have to think about that, preferably before you even start taking the medication. And then of course the last thing to consider, maybe not in the pro and con section, but on the total, is how if I take this drug and I do achieve like the 16% weight loss on Wegovy or the 22% on Mounjaro, will that be enough for me? That's also, I think, important to think about even before you start. Meaning, if your BMI is too high, let's say you have a BMI of 40. Well, if you lose 16% of your body weight and you started from a BMI of 40, you will have lost a bit more than 6 BMI units. So that you will end up with a BMI of 33.5 maybe. And if you have a BMI of 40 and take Mounjaro and get a bit more than 20% weight loss, well, then you will have lost maybe 8.5 BMI units. Then you end up with a BMI of 31.5. So you go from 40 to 33 something, or from 40 to 31 something, but you're still on obesity.
You're still overweight.
Yeah, you still have obesity even. So of course, it's relatively speaking, I'm sure you will feel that you're better off, but your obesity is still there. You still have an increased risk for other health effects long term. Whereas if you have a BMI of, let's say, 32 or 33 or something like that, and you take these drugs, well, then all of a sudden you have a very good sporting chance of maybe even becoming completely normal weight. So I think the current medications that are available will be best suited for people with a BMI of maximum 35 maybe. So 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, somewhere around there. If you lose 15 or 20 or a bit more than 20% of your body weight from that level, well, you end up close to or even at normal body weight. And then you will have had all the health benefits you wanted. And that's probably the group that should primarily think of considering medications. Whereas if you have a BMI of 40 or maybe even more than 40, well, then you should at least have thought about surgery first, because your risk of you feeling long-term that the meds are not effective enough for me are pretty high. So that's another thing to consider. So those are the meds.
Okay.
And then we move on to what I work with normally, and that's bariatric surgery. And there are a number of operations, but there are two that are by far the most frequent and the most popular, and we will limit the discussion today to those two. So one of them is the gastric bypass, which is the one that's been around for the longest time. It's in its original form, it's been around for 50 years. It's way more refined nowadays, of course. So a gastric bypass is when you bypass the majority of the stomach and a part of the small intestine. You don't remove it from the body, but the food doesn't reach the normal stomach anymore, and it doesn't reach the first part of the small intestine anymore. So instead, the food goes from the esophagus down to a small gastric pouch, which is the top of the original stomach, and then directly down into the rest of the small intestine. So if you do that, you have rearranged how the gastrointestinal channel looks, but you haven't removed anything from the body. Then you've done a gastric bypass. The other one is the sleeve gastrectomy or gastric sleeve. And here you do not touch the small intestine, so there's no bypass going on. Instead, you have removed the whole outer curvature of the stomach. So you remove the outer part of the stomach, like 85% of the stomach is removed, and you remove that from the body. and what's left is a stomach that's more like a narrow tunnel, you could say, or sleeve, like the sleeve of a shirt in English. That's hence the name. And then you have done a sleeve gastrectomy. So a gastric bypass, nothing is removed from the body, but you bypass most of the stomach and some of the small intestine, so the food goes straight from the esophagus to a small gastric pouch and straight into the small intestine. Or a sleeve gastrectomy where the food goes down the esophagus but comes into a sleeve stomach that is much, much smaller than the original stomach, but then from there on to a normal small intestine. Those are the two. They're both laparoscopic procedures, meaning they're just 5 small incisions afterwards. In both cases, you are completely under full anesthesia, so you're sleeping as a patient, so you don't really notice what's going on. The surgery takes 30 to 40 minutes, depending on what type of surgery and so on, but not more than that. So it's pretty short surgery duration. In both cases, you will stay at least one night at the clinic for observation. And after the surgery, you will be on sick leave for 2 to 4 weeks. And then you will gradually go from just eating soups and liquid foods and then on to more normal foods. And that will take like 4 to 5 weeks. And then after like 5 weeks, you will be back on eating more normal foods. You will be back at work. And then life after surgery is about having some strict basic routines going on to make the food habits work together with your surgery. So the biggest change in everyday life is usually the fact that you have to eat small meals, chew thoroughly, eat slowly, but instead eat often. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, small meal in between breakfast and lunch, small meal between lunch and dinner, and maybe a small meal in the evening. So 5 or 6 meals per day, but small meals. And that's usually the biggest difference between life after surgery and life before surgery, because most people don't eat 6 times a day, right? Most people eat 2 or 3 or 4 times a day. Then keep track of your fluid intake, take daily vitamin supplements, and again, be as physically active as possible. So as we said in the beginning today, exercise is still always good, and it's good in this situation also.
Why would you prefer one method over another or the other?
You mean bypass or sleeve?
Yeah.
Well,
or is it not something you prefer? It's up to your surgeon or doctor to.
Well, I think it's this will vary from setting to setting. I think, of course, there will be a discussion between the patient and us, because the patient will maybe have their expectations. A lot of patients have been on Google and looked around a lot before they come to the surgery or the first visit. The pro with the sleeve gastrectomy, if you start with that one, is that it's you do not do surgery on the small intestine, meaning there is no bypass involved, meaning you have slightly better vitamin uptake after surgery. You have no increased risk of bowel obstruction or ileus.
Because you're not really changing anything. Everything's the same. It's
sort
just
of, yeah.
a smaller stomach.
Yeah, it's just the stomach that you're doing the surgery on. So, and it also, as for life after surgery, if you have a sleeve gastrectomy, the surgery will be a bit more forgiving if you do something wrong when it comes to how you eat or what you eat and so on. A sleeve gastrectomy tends to be a bit more forgiving towards you as a patient, which, of course, there and then is a good thing, of course. Then the gastric bypass, the pro with the gastric bypass is that it's more effective, and especially it's more long-term effective. It has the follow-up after a bypass when it comes to studies and registries and so on is 20 plus years. So we know that the gastric bypass for the absolute majority of people is effective enough to keep the weight off long-term over time. The sleeve gastrectomy is a more new operation. We're getting 10-year data now. We don't have any like 20 or 20 plus year data at all. But of course, the con with a sleeve is most likely the fact that it is a bit more forgiving as a procedure. But something that is more forgiving is, of course, long term has the risk of being less effective too. And that's what the data is showing, is that both the sleeve and the bypass can give really good weight loss results the first 2, 3, 4 years. But long term, it will be easier for a gastric bypass patient to keep the weight off. A sleeve gastrectomy patient will have to work harder with their everyday life and routines to keep the weight off, because the surgery itself is not as effective. So I think a sleeve gastrectomy is best suited for patients with a BMI of less than 40, so 30 to 40, and gastric bypass if you have a BMI of 40 and above, and especially the further up from 40 you get, then the primary procedure should be a gastric bypass, just because it's more effective. Okay. Then, of course, a person with a BMI of 35 can choose to do a bypass also. That's not a problem. So a gastric bypass has a wider spectrum of where you can use it or should use it than the sleeve does. That's not to say that sleeve is not a good surgery. It can still be a very good surgery, but your BMI should not be too high, because again, you will end up in a bit the same problem as we talked about the medications before, that if your BMI is too high, well, you have the risk of the procedure not being effective enough to actually give you a healthy weight long term, which is what you want usually.
So what happens with surgery is it's not possible to eat as much as you used to, and that results in weight loss. But what about the set point thing?
Yeah, good question. So the set point thing comes into play here too. So in the beginning, the obvious weight loss mechanism is what you just said in the beginning, that your stomach is much smaller. I mean, like a sleeve gastrectomy, stomach is really small. A gastric pouch after a gastric bypass is also really small. So mechanically, you can't eat much. You have to eat very little and eat often. Long term, however, it's not the size of the original stomach after surgery that decides your weight loss. Long term, we've learned that it's actually the same type of mechanisms as the medications that kick in. So it's the long term. It's the fact that even though you do the surgery on your abdomen, you're changing the signaling from the abdomen to the brain in surgery also. So you are affecting the set point for body weight in surgery also. So modern surgery also lowers the set point for body weight, just as the modern medications do.
Okay, and is that also temporarily?
No, then the good thing about surgery is that if you keep your routines in check and long term, you will have the potential of the surgery having a lifelong effect. Mm-hmm. So that's the difference between a surgery and being on meds. The meds you have to refill once a week to keep the effect going, whereas the surgery can be a once in a lifetime procedure that gives you potentially a life-lasting effect, especially after a bypass.
But of course, you benefit if you make some lifestyle changes. Also.
Well, you have to. I mean, you have to adapt your lifestyle quite a lot, especially like what I said before, with eating 6 times per day instead of maybe just 2 or 3. And we're talking about, instead of maybe like you and I can do now, if we're hungry, we can eat a full meal in 5 minutes, right? Because you're really hungry. After surgery, well, the meal will be very small and you still maybe have to spend 20-25 minutes eating it. Meaning the rest of the family around the table will probably be done by the time you finish. Yeah. And they'll have to wait for you and keep you company or whatever, and you'll figure that out. So that's usually the biggest alteration of daily life is usually the eating procedures.
Which is nice. It's like
It's
Italian
nice.
dining.
It is. It is. You should.
You eat for more than 3 minutes.
Exactly. You should talk more. You should interact more. You should socialize more. Then the other part, like keeping track of fluids, eating vitamins, and exercising. Well, of course, it's something you have to learn, but it's not as big like a difference to what everyone else might be doing. So I would say the 6 small meal sessions per day is usually what sets you apart as a person post surgery, as opposed to everyone else, so to speak. On the other hand, again, it's sort of you have to learn this once. So like the first 3 to 6 months after surgery is when you learn this. And once you've learned it, then you make it work at home, and then you make it work at your job, like eating in the breaks and so on. And of course, you have to sort of figure that out, and that will take 3 to 6 months to do that. But once you've done that, and you've sort of cracked the code for both how to make my meals work at home and how to make them work at my job, then you just sort of do the same thing every single day, following this routine. And when you've done that for another month or 2, it sort of kicks into autopilot. And after you come that far, it's really not hard to live like this, because it's all on autopilot. So it's like the first 6 months. That's when you do your remodeling, if you so will, of your daily life to fit the surgery. And once you've done that, it's really not very hard to live with a surgery on the inside. It's just different. So, and then weight loss, your weight curve will be quick, rapid weight loss the first 9 to 12 months, and then slower and slower and slower, and then you will reach your new body weight after 1.5 to 2 years, and then potentially keep that weight off, of course. And average sleeve gastrectomy, 26-27% of your body weight. Average gastric bypass, 33% maybe.
Okay.
And then, of course, that will vary, and the same goes for the medications we talked about before. Some people have more effect, some people have less effect. So these numbers we're talking about all the time now are average numbers, of course. And then the health benefits are very well documented, especially when it comes to the gastric bypass, just because it's been around for such a long time. So we know from studies that it's highly effective against type 2 diabetes. It's very effective against sleep apnea, arthrosis, PCOS in women, etc. And we also know from pooled studies in the Lancet that it will also prolong your life expectancy. So on average, if you do a gastric bypass and lose weight and get the health benefits, you will on average live 6+ years longer than you would have if you did not do the surgery and kept your obesity. So 6 years, which is quite good. So massive health benefits. And then, of course, what are the cons? Well, the cons are the complications, of course. So there's a 3 to 4% risk of more serious complications in the beginning, and meaning bleeding, leakage, or bowel obstruction. All of that can be fixed, and it should be the clinic that does the surgery on you that will fix that for you. So that's sort of the package. That's the way it should be. Long-term complications, not so much for the sleeve gastrectomy. The gastric bypass has one long-term problem, and that's the risk of ileus or bowel obstruction that comes from the fact that you've altered the anatomy of the small bowel. Used to be a bigger problem before. Nowadays, surgery teams have learned to prevent this, so the risk of ileus now is 1 to 2%, so not so much. But, of course, something to be aware of. And then the only real other thing to think of long term, and that goes for both sleeve and bypass, is the fact that you really have to take vitamin supplements the rest of your life. Okay. Even though you're feeling fine, you still have to take those vitamin supplements.
That's not something you can eat your way.
No.
You have to, okay.
Yeah. So yeah. So finally, who should get what treatment? Well, we mentioned it slightly before, but the way I look at it, medications are for people with a body mass index up to maybe maximum 35, but it will be especially well suited for people with a BMI of 30, 31, 32, 33. And that's again because if you take those 16 or 20, 22% weight loss from that BMI level down, you will have, a pretty good chance of being satisfied with the results. Again, keeping in mind that you will most likely have to take these medications continuously for life and not just as like a 12 or 24 months like program and then you finish, because then you will very likely regain the weight again. And then comes the sleeve gastrectomy, which I think is most suited from maybe BMI 30 to maybe BMI 40. And then the gastric bypass from BMI 35 and then all the way up. Okay. And then, of course, some people don't want to have surgery. Some people are not allowed to have surgery. Well, then, of course, a medication is better than nothing, of course. And so they're always the individual cases. But if you want to look at the steps on the treatment ladder, so to speak, I would say medications up to like maximum BMI 35, sleeve, gastrectomy up to maybe maximum BMI 40, and the gastric bypass BMI 35 and up, and basically all the way up. That's how I would look at it. So take-home message from today is, well, most importantly, one, remember set point for body weight. Remember that's why your diets fail. It's not your lack of character. It's not your lack of willpower that made your diets fail. It's your biology, meaning you are not to blame. This is not your fault. Very important to remember that. So you should not walk around feeling like a failure. It's not that people with obesity are fat, lazy, and stupid. It's that people have genes that are sensitive to weight gain. We live in a modern Sweden or a modern UK, which is very toxic to people with obesity-sensitive genes, making it very easy to gain the weight. And once you've gained the weight, your body will defend that higher weight. Even though the higher weight is not good for us, it will still defend the higher weight. And the way that diets fail is because of biology and not your lack of willpower. And then the reason for us wanting to treat obesity is that a high BMI in itself is dangerous long term. We talked about the examples around BMI 40. And then the treatment options are, as we mentioned before. So I think that's like the crash course on obesity. Mm. I hope we didn't miss anything. And if we do, we'll have to do that in the coming episode.
If you want to learn or know more or come in contact with you, Kalle, what can you do? Obviously, we're from Sweden. We normally do this in Swedish.
Yeah.
We're trying to do it in English today.
Yeah.
But if you're watching and Swedish is not your native language, what can you do if you want to?
Yeah, so you can contact us. You can contact me. There's contact info in all the bios on YouTube and Spotify. We have a webpage called cmbpodcast.se.
And we can put links in the bio.
Yeah, so feel free to reach out, or you can email me, and I will gladly answer any of your questions. And if you're interested in bariatric surgery with us, we are the biggest center in Northern Europe, and we also take on international patients. So a lot of patients come to us in Malmö in southern Sweden from other countries to do their bariatric surgery with us. So that's also quite possible, and I can tell you more about that if you're interested.
Nice.
All right. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you, Kalle.
Take care, people.
Yep.
Thank you for watching, and goodbye for now.
Thank you. Bye.